I've heard this so many times from so many people over the years, and they said, if I ever discovered something that worked better, I would do that. They were referring to like another martial art, I think, generally speaking. But then
Sure.
when presented with new training paradigms, new training methodologies and practices, run for the hills. Most recently, I was thinking about how when we first started training Taijutsu, everybody was coming from other martial arts,
Yeah.
right? And, it's like you look back at criticisms over the years of people who study Bujinkan and related martial arts. And a lot of the good faith criticisms are great. And there's a lot of trolling, deservedly oftentimes, trolling. But, um, one of the things that you see people get super defensive, from the Bujinkan side is, one of the first things you hear is, but not my teacher, not my teacher, when it comes to training methodology or fighting skills or just really anything at all. Sometimes people are criticized for not being traditional enough, and someone will say, "Oh, but not my teacher," or our training methodology, or the training methodologies are terrible, and this, but not my teacher. And I think that's a holdover from the 80s and early 90s when people were training and they came from other martial arts, right? So I came from a karate style that was, heavy into sparring. You came from judo,
Hmm.
which, had similar, competitive
Very randori based.
origins. Yeah. And almost everybody that I was trained with came from kickboxing, judo, something or
Something.
other that it
Yeah.
already involved fighting of some kind of, some amount of sparring. And so I
Yeah.
feel like those first years, you had a whole bunch of people who already had fighting skills who were then studying this old Japanese jujitsu martial art, calling it taijutsu, or
Sure.
in some of the old days, some people call it ninjutsu. They thought that knew what they're getting themselves into, but they already know how to fight. I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know what you think, but to me that explained at least a lot of the early years defensiveness of the criticism that came from other
Mm.
martial artists anyway.
Yeah. I know for me, it was just that, this fascinating new cool thing that hadn't been available before. So now it's available, and everyone was stoked to try something more interesting, more varied. Uh,
Yeah.
like I liked growing up doing what I was doing. Like judo was really helpful. Uh, but the idea that there were all these other modalities of training, like that there's the striking part, there's the grappling part, there's the judo like parts that I felt comfortable with. There was the all the weapon stuff that was totally unfamiliar and exotic, and certainly fit the more cultural aspects of it differently. And I appreciated those. Um, I guess because I was looking for something new, I wasn't trying to like defend the roots that I came from. Like I wasn't like, oh, judo did
Mhm.
this. Uh, but I don't think that the early Bujinkan days really picked on where you came from that much. Maybe because
Right.
everybody was, like you said, a mishmash from somewhere else.
Yeah, people brought, the previous experience, and so there was some amount of randori. There was obviously we've talked about this before. There was just a grasping of just trying to find any amount of techniques, and whether these the early Hayes books, or when
Yeah.
Hatsumi Sensei started publishing book or co-publishing books, and the videos came out. Yeah, we just grasped onto whatever we could get our hands onto.
I think that's probably a big part of it is nobody could really get their hands on much actual things to do that they knew was actually the right thing to do. So it was just easier to say, hey, we're kind of going to go back to
Yeah.
experimenting. Because what the hell else were you gonna do? You weren't very few people spoke the language, very even fewer could read the language, Japanese being the root source material.
Yeah.
So and then even fewer of them had been to see one of the senior teachers that had access to the information, so it was just a bunch of guesswork. So you were kinda stuck with an outcome-based process that you were pursuing. You didn't know what the performative basis was. Like, we had some
That's a
basic
good point.
idea.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all just trying to figure out what right was.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It was a lot more outcome based at some point. So we saw things that we figured were techniques, and then we had to work on them usually they were outside in training groups or something, or in shared spaces. And we just had to try to figure out something that we thought we saw. So in that sense, it was much more outcome based as opposed to process based, right?
Yeah, and I think some of as people started to pick up information that seemed at least reliable or consistent with other sources of information to at least verify, yeah, I thought that was called this, you thought that was called this, that word does seem to mean this, whatever nuances there might be. And then there were some sense of there's a right way to do this. And then curriculum started to develop and people would say, well, now we know what to work on. And it was really amorphous for a really long time though. So I think that's where the
Yeah.
not my teacher stuff came from was, hey, I'm in this little isolated bubble of what we think is the right thing to do. So I'm just gonna hope that's true. And if something doesn't look like it, I don't know. I'm hoping that's not it because that's not what I'm doing.
It's like such a cop out. It's such a cliche. I don't know. It's all sort of the weird words, to say like, well, back in my day, it was. But I think when you just examine it and try to be as analytical as possible, you kind of look at back in my like whatever somebody's day in the 80s,
Yeah.
90s, whatever the training methodology was different only because like it had to be
Yeah.
right. There was for a while it was only in the United States and it was only Steve Hayes who had been to Japan. Right, and so he had a bunch of books out, and then he
Yeah.
hosted Hatsumi Sensei in Ohio, and then so finally, people started to get an idea of what, training was like, coming from the source.
Yeah.
And then no, that's interesting, right? Transition. So when people started being able to go over to Japan and come back, then we started seeing a lot more of those, like the sage on the stage, some of the people, right? It's like, no, then it was like, no, I have the right way of doing it. And then people started criticizing Steve Hayes, in that, they sort of say, oh, well, this is the way they're really doing it in Japan. And then be
Right.
like a new crop of people go to Japan and go back and say, no, this is the way they're really doing it. When probably training over there was evolving too. People thought that, the piece that they saw was like the whole picture. It just goes back to, that whole analogy of a bunch of people was it maybe they're blindfolded. I'm not sure, they're, touching a different piece of
With
the elephant and thinking,
elephant
oh, well,
there.
this is what an elephant is. And they describe the trunk only or a leg only or something along those
Oh,
lines,
it's absolutely that, and you had a lot of that, and then people would occasionally get to touch a different part of the elephant and feel like, "Oh, I just discovered this whole new thing. Nobody outside of
Yeah.
Japan knows this," and
Yeah, yeah.
in
Nobody's
some
ever
cases,
seen
there's
this
probably even an old
before. Yeah,
book,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Like, "What are you talking about?" Like that no one had great notes either, but I'm sure that somebody's, new, "Oh, I found this new thing," comes back and has this revelatory workshop. And
yeah,
somebody in the back was like, "I did that. That's like in this old book that we got in the '80s. What are you talking about? That's old information." Because no one knew. It was recycled, and they're
yeah.
evolving how to teach. They're evolving. It's also true that as you learn more, you can look back and realize from a different set of perspectives, like, "Oh, that was actually this other thing." So
Yeah, right.
even
The 2020
yes,
hindsight thing, right? We can look back at all these different eras of notes and be like, oh, this sort of thing was trying to be this teacher was trying to express this or whatever. Maybe
yeah,
Hatsumi Sensei had a particular theme in mind, and so somebody else came back and thought this is all of what Taijutsu is supposed to be. But looking back, you can kind of piece the puzzle, put the puzzle pieces back together, and see something much more interesting.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Some people started to see more of the elephant, I guess.
Yeah,
And then
yeah, right.
recognize, oh, okay, that then there's to kill this analogy where, there's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
there's a well-fed elephant, that's a skinny elephant, that's the angry
yeah,
elephant,
right.
whole different
Yeah,
moods, and like, "Oh, what am I learning? I don't know." So, yeah, it was just the exploration, I think, was a magical time of the Takamatsu martial arts
yeah,
because they had everyone just was stuck with, "We don't know what the real thing is, so let's see if we can make it work."
right, right. And
And
then we
it's
get
funny
into
now we're
like,
cycling back to saying, "Hey, that's the right way to go."
yeah, I know. The whole ecological dynamics things. Every time, we got start going through the videos of the books, and we see these quotes from Hatsumi Sensei, and you hear him talking about, like I'm not teaching techniques, I'm teaching essence,
Yeah,
or
yeah. Do not
whatever.
memorize techniques.
Yeah, do
Yeah,
not memorize techniques.
Like,
You know,
wait a
these
minute, we
types of
worked really hard to write those down.
yeah, it's like, wait a second. So, yeah, right. Oh, yeah. So they're right. There's the grasping, right? There's the clinging that comes with, like now suddenly you have like a book of information as if this is now the tome of all tomes. And as long as I memorize all the words in this thing, right, I'm going to have like a magic spell to make me, to make me move better or something,
Oh
as opposed to
gosh.
it being actually experiential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I don't know. I certainly am glad that there is the opportunity for people to get that classic, literally classic information and say, "Hey, what was it like? What were they doing?"
Yeah.
And add to that knowledge, kind of jump in the stream, as it were. It's
Yeah.
boy, it will kill another analogy, but yeah, like if you jump in the stream, you can flow. That's what the whole Nagare to the whole Ryu is. Like if you're
Yeah.
doing whatever martial arts lineage, that Ryu, it's a
Yeah.
flow. But there's that idea, that concept in education or an experience that you can't ever jump in the same river twice,
Right.
right? 'Cause it's always changing every time you step back into it.
Yeah. And you're not the same person, right?
Yeah.
You're not the
So
same person. It's not the same river.
yeah, it's not the
Yeah.
same you. It's not. Yeah. So I think putting all that together it's uncomfortable because you want to have right answers, and then
Yeah.
you want to know that your teacher was right. Your mini lineage tracing this back to the lineages was like the right one or something, and that your
Well, I mean,
exercises and drills.
it's so difficult in many different ways to think that there's a maybe I don't know, maybe there's a sunk cost fallacy thing, when you are a student and you
Oh yeah.
think, well, I've been with this teacher for so many years, and they have to be right, or I've wasted, so
Well,
many
that's
years of
super
my life
valid.
or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I guarantee
Uh,
that's yeah, and put in the perspective. Yeah, that is absolutely on point. I think it's just a human condition problem. Yeah.
yeah,
We're gonna
yeah,
solve that
definitely.
right
Because
now, right?
we've spoken to instructors of school owners as well who have bravely admitted, that they were afraid that their students were going to be better than them.
Yeah.
And so we have to assume that it is a human problem, right? Because those school owners are also students, right? And they're hoping
Yeah.
that their teachers were right, and
Boy, yeah, it's just so much to go with on that. Because realistically, if you're doing a good job, your students should end up better than you. There's all
yeah,
the classic fighter examples of like Tyson and Castamato. Like,
yeah, yeah.
Castamato's not getting in that ring, man.
No, 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 no,
You
no.
know,
Yeah, but
Tyson.
yeah,
Um,
he coached one of the baddest,
yeah,
boxers ever to live. Right,
yeah,
right.
that's true in so many sports where, like, the absolute champions are being coached by people who could never do what they can do.
Yeah,
Not to cop out that you shouldn't try to be as good as you can get if you're gonna teach people, but
yeah.
then there's that thought process of like, "Oh, can I imagine, being able to defeat my teachers because 'cause they're supposed to be so good, they're the example of what I'm trying to do
Yeah,
from movement." No, that's not a good
yeah, yeah.
attitude.
Yeah, that really goes back to like the kung fu movie days, of like this family versus this school or whatever, this clan
Yeah.
versus this clan, it's like it wasn't until like the UFC, we actually could people just jump in a ring
Boy.
and prove themselves or whatever the case may be. But
Yeah,
there's also like the gatekeepers. So think about like in our system, even if you say you go to Japan and you move to Japan to teach English and you're training in the Bujinkan, so you get to go to Hombu dojo,
sure.
right? And like maybe you studied Japanese in college and now you're Japanese. Like if you're smart about it, you're actually not only speaking English when you're in Japan, you're actually learning Japanese.
Yeah.
Now suddenly, you start to use like the magical incantations, of Japanese, and now you become one of sometimes, not everybody, right? But
Yeah.
I'm speaking of the gatekeepers in particular
Yeah.
who will like only use certain like Japanese words, they'll throw them out. It's like you could actually just use English for that one. Right there. Like we're all
Yeah.
speaking English here. You don't have to say, Ringo for apple.
Yeah.
Like there
It's
was
tough, right?
nothing
'Cause
magical
yeah.
about you using Japanese. Yeah.
Boy, I get the desire to create an atmosphere or "Oh, this is a fun thing, it's a foreign thing, we're bringing culture into it." But yeah, a lot of times it devolves into that gatekeeping, "I've got special knowledge" thing.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, Again, trying to fall into, my teacher had special knowledge and then they gave it to me and "Come to me and I'll
Yeah,
give it to you." It's
yeah.
creepy. But it's a thing.
Everyone wants to be like the golden child, like
Yeah.
I'm in there and I've been discovered and now I'm, the receiver of the secret teachings. And,
Oh,
like
yeah.
who wouldn't want to be able to like take that pill and suddenly
Actually,
be
that
Neo
sounds
from the
awesome.
Matrix? Yeah. It sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, dang. And
Yeah.
and then, we watch, nature. We've got, the cubs eventually take over the pack and the older animals that were in charge die off.
Yeah.
And you think that's kind of how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to get better and better.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I prefer like the community building aspect of it, like as far as, the Japanese language, and with our systems, the terminology that goes around, or that flows through all of it is a genuine opportunity to actually be part of a Japanese historical lineage and
oh
culture,
my gosh.
and
Yeah.
to actually just study it for just for the fascination of it, maybe because, it's a pretty cool thing to learn about, to get yourself into.
It is. I mean, I'm biased. My the undergrad days were in, cultural anthropology, and I studied
Yeah.
linguistics.
Right.
So I'm gonna say that you're correct all day on that whole thing, and I think that's the
Yeah.
most valuable part that we can pass on. But that's it, like,
Yeah.
by having a study and an appreciation for that part of it is what keeps it being not just a fighting method or a sport or just some, "Hey, let's see who can do whatever technique most effectively at each other." It it
Yeah.
it's the value for bringing some of that stuff is to ideally put those cultures together. And,
Mhm.
2 plus 2 is not just 4, but, it makes more. And yeah, it's a shame to see it reduced so often to, "I have special knowledge, therefore, if you follow me, you'll, get some of it over time." There, man, like, I think
Yeah.
is the magic is trying to get I don't know if it's just taking show 'em more parts of the elephant or try to take those blindfolds off them if they're, like, not looking for the whole elephant. Yeah, I don't know what mixed metaphor to throw out here, but, yeah, I think the hard part that we are trying to solve is getting that appreciation of the cultural background, that preservation of what was the fun, valuable experience of being a foreign culture experience, and making it not just choreographed movement, right? Because that's not what
Right.
anybody got into it for.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah. I remember, I've heard this so many times from so many people over the years, and they said, if I ever discovered something that worked better, I would do that. And they were referring to like another martial art, I think, generally speaking. But then
sure.
when presented with new training paradigms, new training methodologies and practices, nah, run for the hills. Run for the hills. Look, some people have been, doing sort of naturalistic training, in varied environments,
Sure.
for their entire training careers. And like, I think that's probably a healthy way to go.
I
But
I I think
oftentimes,
so.
yeah, when people, hear from someone that they trust, like perfect practice makes perfect, and you know, they want to get out the measuring tools and try to get everything perfect. When, we know now that like that's an impossible thing to do.
Yeah,
But,
yeah,
now that we've incorporated ecological dynamics into our thinking, into our practices, now suddenly, we can look at a lot of the traditional kata and think that these are situations, right? These are
sure.
or conditions, or,
Well,
depending on, what part we're looking at,
right.
right?
We were saying earlier, it's almost as if like when you've had some experience, you look back at your old notes, you realize, oh, I see what that was now is in the context.
Yeah.
Like now, through our current lens of skill acquisition, we're looking at old Hatsumi Sensei quotes
Yeah.
and seeing like,
Yeah.
oh, he was just
Yeah.
teaching ecological psychology as an
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
tactic
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Right.
skill
Yeah. Yeah.
acquisition.
Right. 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 Yeah.
And I almost guarantee he was not, but
No, no, no. I'm sure he would not have used any of those, any of that
yeah, yeah,
vocabulary at
the
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 time.
equivalent.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
this is 100% my bias, like reading
yeah,
into, all these Hatsumi, but they just fit so well. They fit so perfectly. It's like,
it
oh,
is.
actually, if we were doing what he was saying to do, not just
Yes.
kind of like, I don't know, whatever I don't even know where I'm going with that. Like if we took him a little bit more literally,
Mm.
and not, okay, let's try to be an artist the way he's an artist. If we actually took his instructions literally, I think our training methodologies would have been, a lot, more improved.
I I'm biased, obviously, and I think you're absolutely on point there. 'cause the things he was outlining would have led to an athletic appreciation for movement and
Mhm.
an exploration, and still would have taught the same darn kata. You'd still have, "Hey,
And
this is," you twist his hand this way, you call it that thing in this family line of martial arts.
yeah,
That's
we
not
would
gonna
have
get
had just had
lost.
we would have had a common vocabulary from where to
Yeah,
start, right? So, okay, so when we're talking about, this position or, these types of things or potential conditions, we're going to use, this kata from this particular lineage, as a starting point. And then we just have a, whatever, just some common vocabulary.
we can only hope.